Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. Today we are going to discuss one of the most important and fundamental topics in software testing, especially for manual testers and testing beginners. The topic for today's video is requirement analysis in software testing, how testers read and analyze the requirement. So now before we go any further, let me clearly say this. Many people think that testing starts when we write the test cases. But in real projects, testing starts much earlier. So testing actually starts at the requirement stage itself. If a tester does not understand requirement properly, test cases will be incorrect, important scenarios will be missed, bug will go to the production, and tester will struggle badly in a real project. So today I want you to listen carefully and understand how professional testers analyze the requirement. So in today's session, we are going to cover the following points step by step. First, we will understand what requirement analysis actually means. Then we will discuss why requirement analysis is extremely important for testers. After that, we will look at different types of requirement documents testers work with. Then comes the most important part, how testers read and analyze requirements step by step. So we will also cover a real-time practical example, some common mistakes testers make, and finally some key takeaways. By the end of this video, you should be confident enough to say, yes, I understand how to read requirements like a tester. So now let us understand the most basic question. What is requirement analysis? The requirement analysis is the process where testers carefully read the requirements, understand what the business or client actually wants, analyze what functionalities the system should provide, identify unclear points, missing points, and confusing statements, and make sure the requirements can be tested. So from a tester's point of view, requirement analysis means answering one very important question. What exactly should I test and how should the system behave? The requirement analysis happens before the development, before test case writing, and even before the test case execution. So this is why requirement analysis is considered the first activity of testing. So now here is something very important you must understand. A tester does not read requirements the same way a developer reads them. A developer usually reads requirements and thinks, how can I implement this feature? But a tester reads the requirement and think, what can go wrong here? So while reading the requirements, a tester continuously asks questions like, what is the expected behavior? What input values are allowed? What output should be shown? What happens if the user enters wrong data? What happens if the system fails? This questioning mindset is what separates a tester from a developer. Requirement analysis is the phase where this mindset begins. So now let us understand why requirement analysis is so important. So in real world projects, most defects are not introduced during coding. Most defects are introduced due to poor or unclear requirements. So if testers do not analyze requirements properly, they will miss important test scenarios. They will write incomplete test cases. Defects will be found very late, and fixing defects later is very expensive. So good requirement analysis helps testers to understand business needs clearly, identify gaps before the development starts, reduce rework and retesting, prevent defect leakage, and improve product quality. So this is why requirement analysis is often called the foundation of software testing. So now a very common question is, when does a requirement analysis start? So the requirement analysis start as soon as the requirements are shared with the team. So even before the development begins, much before test case writing. And one more important thing, requirement analysis does not happen only once. So it continues when a new requirements are added, when requirements are changed, or when some clarifications are provided. So the requirement analysis is not a one-time activity. it is a continuous activity throughout the project. So in real projects, testers do not get requirements from just one source. So requirements can come in different formats, such as business requirement specification or business requirement documents such as BRS or BRD documents, software requirement specification, that is SRS, user stories, especially in agile projects, we get user stories like instead of BRS or SRS. So each document gives a different level of detail. Testers must analyze all of them very carefully. So let us start with the first document, that is BRS, that is the business requirement specification document, or business requirement document, that is BRD. So BRS is a very high level document. It mainly focuses on business needs, client expectations, what problem the software should solve. So for example, like the user should be able to make online payment securely. So now from a tester's point of view, the business intention is clear, but testing details are missing. So the tester immediately starts thinking what type of payments, is there any limit for payment, what security rules, any validation. So this means BRS is not enough for testing, but it helps testers understand the bigger picture. Now let us move to the next important document, that is the SRS document, software requirement specification document. Okay, so SRS is a detailed document compared to BRS. While BRS talks about what the business wants, SRS talks about how the system should behave. So the SRS usually contains detailed functional requirements, detailed non-functional requirement, validation rules, error handling conditions. So now let us take an example for the SRS. Okay, so the system should allow users to make payments using credit card, debit card, and UPI. Or in the second example is an OTP must be sent to the registered mobile number before completing the transaction. So now as a tester, you start thinking what happens if the OTP is incorrect, what happens if the OTP expires, is there a retry limit, what happens if network fails during payment. So this is why SRS is very important for testers, because it helps in identifying the detailed test scenarios. So in agile project, requirements are mostly written in user stories, not BRS or SRS. The user story is written in a very simple format, such as a user, I want to do something so that I can do something. Okay, so let us look at an example. User story is, as a registered user, I want to reset my password so that I can access my account again. Okay, so now testers do not just read this line and move on. Testers analyze who is the user, when can password be reset, what validation rules exist, what is the success message, what happens if email is not registered. So along with user stories, testers also look at acceptance criteria, some edge cases, some negative scenarios. So even though user stories look simple, they require deep analysis. So these are some examples, like user story, like we get a user story for reset password functionality. Tester analyzes registered versus unregistered email, validation rules, error messages, or the success scenarios. So now let us understand how testers actually analyze the requirements. So testers usually follow a structured thinking process, read the requirements like an end user, identify functional requirements, identify non-functional requirements, identify the ambiguous requirements, identify missing requirements, or identify possible test scenarios. So now we will go through each step slowly with some examples. Okay, so the first and important step is read requirements like a end user, real end user. Okay, so do not read requirements like a developer. Instead, imagine yourself as a customer, as a first time user, or as a non-technical person. Okay? So let's take an example of one requirement. Users should be able to register using email and password. So now a tester thinks, can the same email be used twice? Is email mandatory? What password rules exist? What happens if user enters invalid email? So this kind of thinking starts at a requirement analysis phase and not during the test execution. The functional requirements describe what the system do. Okay, so the second step is functional requirements, identifying the functional requirements. So functional requirements basically describe what the system should do. So again, let us take a login functionality example. So the functional flow is like user enters the username, then enters password, then clicks on a login button, system validates the credentials, and then user is redirected to the dashboard. So the tester breaks this flow into individual test conditions, positive scenarios, negative scenarios. So basically the functional requirement analysis helps testers understand what exactly need to be tested. The next step is identifying the non-functional requirements. So the non-functional requirements describe how the system should perform. So these include performance, security, usability, compatibility. So for example, the login page should load within 3 seconds. So again, now the tester thinks, what if it takes 5 seconds? Is that acceptable? How will performance be measured? So even if non-functional requirements are not clearly mentioned, testers must ask questions and raise concerns. The next step is ambiguous requirements. So ambiguous requirements are those which are not clearly defined. So for example, the application should be user friendly. Now this statement sounds good, but it is not testable because the tester should ask, what does user friendly mean? So there should be some definition of user friendly. Are there any UI guidelines? Are there any acceptance criteria? If the requirements are ambiguous and testers do not ask questions, future defects are guaranteed. So that's why testers should be asking questions regarding the requirement in the requirement analysis phase itself. Next step is missing requirements. Missing requirements. So the missing requirements are also called hidden defects. So let us take an example. User can update profile. Now a tester must think which field can be updated. Can email be updated? Is OTP required? Any validation rule? If these questions are not clarified now, bugs will appear during the UAT or production. So that's why any missing requirement should be identified. The next step is identifying the test scenarios. So from one requirement, testers should identify multiple scenarios. So for example, if we consider a login feature, then the possible scenarios are login with valid credentials, login with invalid password, login with invalid username, login with empty fields, login with locked account, login after multiple failures. So again, login with valid username and invalid password, and vice versa. Okay, so these are the possible scenarios testers should identify in the requirement analysis phase. So all these ideas come from requirement analysis, and it's not a guesswork. So let's analyze a real-time requirement. So there is a requirement such that the user should be able to log in using registered email and password. If credentials are invalid, an error message should be displayed. Now the tester analysis include positive scenario, negative scenarios, field validations, error message validation, security checks like password masking. So from one simple requirement, testers generate multiple test ideas. So this is basically requirement analysis in action. So during the requirement analysis, testers attend requirement review meetings, participate in agile grooming sessions, ask clarification questions, identify testability issues, start preparing RTM, requirement traceability matrix, start drafting test scenarios. A tester's mindset during this phase should always be what can go wrong here. Okay, so there are some common mistakes we as a tester should avoid, such as skipping requirement analysis, making assumptions, not asking questions, blindly trusting documents, writing test cases without clarity. So always remember, wrong understanding leads to wrong testing. So now let us summarize today's session. Requirement analysis is the foundation of testing. Testing starts before test case writing, okay, and it starts in the requirement analysis phase itself. Testers must question and should not assume anything. Strong requirement understanding makes strong testers. If you master this phase, your testing quality will improve drastically. So that brings us to end of today's session. In the upcoming videos, we will cover RTM creation, requirement traceability matrix creation, test scenario writing, test case design from requirements. Thank you for watching. Happy testing.